Okay, so welcome to the second part of this presentation. And in the second part, I will give you a chronology of the use of drugs during World War II by the different actors in this war, and then the use of drugs in Axis and Allies forces, and finally we'll do a conclusion of this topic. So, 1934, this was where Benzedrine was introduced on the US market, on the US civilian market as a drug, just as a drug to treat depression and other ailments. In 1938, methamphetamine, known as Pervitin, appears in Germany as a concurrent to Benzedrine. In 1939, there's the introduction of Pervitin and the Wehrmacht. In 1939, it was also the invasion of Poland. World War II starts. 1940, it is the invasion of France. In 1941, there is Pervitin restriction in the Wehrmacht. It is at the same time that the Finnish army is joining side by side the Axis, and Pervitin is introduced in the Finnish army. In 1941, it is the invasion of the Soviet Union, so Operation Barbarossa. There's following this episode, there's introduction of alcohol in the Soviet army. 1941 is also Pearl Harbor. There's massive use of methamphetamine in Japan at that time. In 1942 and 1943, respectively, Benzedrine is introduced first in the UK and then in the US armies. It is during that time that there is a turning point, which is the Battle of Stalingrad. It is the D-Day in 1944 and of World War II in 1945. So first I will talk about the use of drugs in Germany from 1939 to 1945. So methamphetamine, also known as Pervitin, there were some clinical trials in the army between 1938 and 1939. 1939 was officially tested during Polish invasion, and in 1940 it was agreed, an agreement was made, and there was distribution to the Wehrmacht and the Kriegsmarine, so soldiers and the Marine, so 30 million tablets per year. It is to be known that Pervitin administration was under medical supervision. And 1941, despite the medical supervision, there was some abuse and distribution was reduced to 10 million tablets per year because of drug abuse. Drugs was, methamphetamine was also given, Pervitin was also given to civilians as well in the industry and armaments industry to keep up production as well. It is also, maybe there was also some possible economical interest of a Terminal company because it was a lot of different drug companies such as Bayer, for example, or the Terminal company, which did Pervitin, were interested to sell their drugs to the army, and only the Terminal company won that contract. So it was also maybe a very interesting, profitable profit opportunity here. Caffeine. Okay, so caffeine was used by everyone because I showed you before that it was used by only the Kriegsmarine, so the army the soldiers, and by the fleet, but it was not used by pilots because methamphetamine was creating too much side effects, and so instead caffeine was given to everyone, so soldiers, but also pilots, civilians, and it was very much appreciated by air pilots for longer missions, which required a sustained vigilance. So what about alcohol? So alcohol was used by everyone. Even though it was prohibited by death penalty in the army, alcohol remained very present, and apparently at least 2,000 deaths in the Wehrmacht are caused by alcohol abuse. So in Finland, 1939 to 1945. So methamphetamine, 1941. So methamphetamine was actually used by the Finnish army at the beginning of 1941. It was introduced at the same time as Germany wanted to reduce its stocks. 850,000 tablets were distributed at that time. It was mostly used by Allied commandos and used by infantry in case of emergencies. For morphine or heroin, it was actually very widely used. It was used for various elements, from bullet wound pain to simple cold, actually, and it was a way also to boost up morale in difficult times. It was widely used before and during the war, and there were some cases of addiction, of course. Um, Now we're going to talk about Japan for 1941 to 1945. And so methamphetamine was actually widely used during that time, and it was recommended by government. Methamphetamine use was recommended by the government to soldiers and civilians. In 1941, there was 24 drug specialties containing methamphetamine or amphetamine which were on the market. It was used by civilians and by the army. It was actually so recommended that it has actually a name. It was named Senryoku Sokyozai, which means to increase fighting. Alcohol consumption was kind of very low, except in kamikaze farewell parties. Okay, so we had a glimpse of all the drug use in the Axis. Now we're gonna have an overview of the use of drugs in the Allies, and we're going to start with the United Kingdom from 1939 to 1945. So amphetamine, also commercially known as Benzedrine, was introduced after field observations and clinical trials, despite the fact that there was no difference of efficacy which was observed with caffeine. It was introduced in the Royal Air Force in 1942, and then later on this year it was introduced in the army. For the USA, from 1941 to 1945, Benzedrine clinical trials started actually much sooner than the UK in 1939. It did not prove to be better than caffeine as well, and distribution in all war theaters started from 1943, so much later on. And it was also used by the Royal Air Force, the pilots, but it also used by soldiers as well. And for pilots was used as a Benzedrine inhaler to fight off the cold symptoms, but it also used to give a bit of peps during long air missions. You can actually find all these details if you're interested in the first aid manual. You will see that among the equipment of soldiers, you had some Benzedrine tablets, which were actually like in this kit here, which is in the picture above. You can also see which was also given. So as well, there was also a possible economical interest of the SKF firm, Smith Klein and French firm, which there was actually potential financial interest. Okay, what about alcohol? So during World War II, 45,000 US soldiers were diagnosed as alcoholic. I should remind that the total US Army personnel in 1941 was of 12 million. Finally, I will present you USSR. So in USSR, not many drugs which are used. Actually, only alcohol is to be accounted for. Following 1941 defeat, so the Operation Barbarossa, 100 grams of vodka rations per soldier were restored and distributed again. Luckily, it's with end this presentation. So this is an overview of the different stimulants which were used. So you're gonna look that on leisure afterwards, and the effects and the different molecules of depressants which were used. So as a summary, drugs played a supportive role in the war. It was by boosting up performance in soldiers and civilians. However, there was a massive drug distribution, which was probably linked to addiction and increased mortality or morbidity, which was probably another burden among soldiers and civilians. As an opening, it was the first war using a medical approach to improve soldiers and civilian performances. Important financial stakes were probably linked to drugs introduction in armies, and psychoactive drugs are used again in the following conflicts in the US Army during the Korean War, Vietnam, and so on. Here are two books I recommend to read, and mostly Shooting Up by Lucas Kamienski, which give you a really nice overview of the use of different drugs from the antiquity until now. So very complete, very nice references. I really recommend it. On Speed is more focused on the use of amphetamine in the US, from medical use to the army use, so you can really have a look at it as well. Here are my sources. I hope you enjoyed the video, and see you on the next one. If you have any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate. Thank you very much.